for Donald Trump as president. I think the question most people still have at this point is kind of looking back at all the different things that Donald Trump had said along the way, and continues to say, why that was the one that kind of said, okay, now decided to not vote for him.
Well, as you know, there were many occasions where I renounced things that he had said, and I wanted to be able to vote for a Republican nominee that was certainly chosen by the people and also won the New Hampshire primary because I want to take our country in a different direction. But, having been a former prosecutor and after listening to the statements that were made and the tapes that were released last Friday, those statements to me went to the issue of assault, and that was why I renounced him on many occasions. That was fundamentally different, and he was talking about crime on there. So I believe that having been a prosecutor, I've worked on certainly difficult cases over my career before I served in the Senate, and really thinking that I have a 12-year-old daughter. At some point, she'll be old enough to, I think understand and listen to that. Obviously, not having her at this point, but when she becomes an adult, and I wanted her to know where I stood on this. So I won't be voting for Donald Trump. I won't be voting for Hillary Clinton either. That's where I came to that decision.
Were you surprised when you heard the tape that he would talk about women in that way? Was that surprising to you, or?
It wasn't, for me, it was just listening to it having been as a prosecutor, this was direct discussion about, non-consensual treatment of women. So. Did
you have those fears that he might be like that before you heard?
Well, obviously I've renounced him on things that he has said, but the tape is, the tape speaks for itself. And having been a prosecutor, these are direct words that I take very seriously.
Why the decision to suggest or say that you're going to do a write-in vote for Pence? How did you come to that conclusion that was how you would insult personally?
Well, I have one vote in this, so I'm going to have to, exercise my vote. And, I believed in terms of how, watching certainly Governor Pence and the debate and how he conducted himself, and he does have an experienced record as a governor and member of Congress. So that's who I'll be writing in, but people have to make their own decisions in this election about how they feel about not only the candidates that are printed on the ballot or whether they're, who they're going to put in.
Between Friday evening and Saturday, when you said you wouldn't vote for him, did you have conversations with other Republican leaders about writing in Pence, or was that something you came to on your own? Or?
No, this is my decision. This is my decision because, as I've expressed, and I've said this before, this issue for me is more important than, having listened to that tape, come to the conclusion that I came to, and knowing that my daughter's going to, at some point, when she's an adult, perhaps understand and look at what's in that tape. This is important for me, and that's more important than winning an election. And so, that's a decision I came to, thinking for myself.
So you're not looking at it in terms of organizing a movement to get Pence elected? This is just for you a very personal
This is
thing,
this is my vote on one person, and I'm obviously in a public position, so unlike most people, I'm publicly telling people because what I'm doing, but I have one vote in this, and I know that people will make up their own minds about what they want to do in this election. And obviously, the Senate race is one where this is an important race as well in terms of, who will be New Hampshire's voice in the Senate.
Do you feel like writing in Mike Pence is kind of throwing your vote away this cycle when it's a very high-profile race between two controversial candidates, and you're writing in someone who, you don't really think has a chance to really become president?
I feel like I'm a voter like everyone else, and I'm going to be writing in someone who I think is qualified. And so, I think every voter will make up their own mind who they want to vote for.
Because you're a U.S. Senator, when
Yes.
you say you're voting for Mike Pence, it does carry some weight with people. So, I'm a voter. Obviously, I'm in a public position, so unlike most voters who go in the ballot and probably cast their vote, we hope confidentially, based on what they think is in their heart, I obviously want to be transparent with people about what I'm doing. And so, but I'm really not in a position of then to exercise my own vote. what I mean to say is there's probably other folks that are dissatisfied with their choice for president. And therefore they look to you and they see your decision, and maybe it is a way out for them, a choice that they can make. Or many people in this country are looking for a different choice.
Let me just say that I don't pretend to have that much, I'll hopefully express some humility here and don't pretend to have that much influence. So I do think, and we know one of the things about people in New Hampshire, they're very independent spirited and minded, so I think that the voters will make up their own mind regardless of how I exercise my vote.
It should be no surprise that when we're weighing candidates, we look at their positions on signal issues and where they differ.
Sure.
And one of those, and it hasn't been a major factor in this race, but the differences between you and Maggie is your stances on the death penalty.
Mm-hmm. We do have different positions on that.
And you do agree on Addison's case, and I'm not sure, I personally wouldn't agree with those positions, but in any event.
Yeah. I don't know how, though, you can, with all respect, I don't know how you can pick out one case and
No,
say.
I know.
So I
It's
don't, we can have different positions on this, but I think it's problematic to say this one case it's okay, even though I disagree with it. So my position's, as you know, been consistent since I was Attorney General.
Sure.
Yeah.
And some governors have suspended all executions, for example, across the board.
Right.
But in any event, that like the choice issue, there are legitimate differences that are moral and complicated and have to be respected.
Right. Exactly.
But I'm curious the extent of your feeling about that if one senator has a tremendous amount of power, as we saw with Ted Cruz, and would you not just vote to maintain the death penalty if it came to that on a national level, but would you work to impede that vote or do something that
I think you can look at my record and how I've conducted myself in the Senate, Ralph, and I try to, I would vote how I believe is, what I believe is the appropriate course on the policy. But I'm someone who believes that certainly process should go forward and everyone should have an opportunity to vote what they think is right on issues. So I don't know what the exact procedural posture would be, but certainly, I think on lots of issues where I have disagreements, I'm not looking to block people procedurally necessarily from expressing what their viewpoints are.
I'm just thinking.
Yeah, which is, obviously on the, and with someone like the situation with the government shutdown, that, as you know, I was very vocal, even though I've had some serious disagreements with the healthcare law. I didn't believe that that was a strategy that was appropriate. So that's why I stood up to him in my caucus and also on the Senate floor.
Reflect the Republican Party that I grew up in. How do you, what are we going to see in the weeks and years ahead?
You know, it's really, you know, this is obviously a favorite question of pundits, and I try not to be a pundit. So I know one thing, that, you know, I'm a Republican. I know what I believe, and I'm going to continue, if I have the privilege of serving again, to be, you know, a leader in the way that I have been with regard to issues for our state. And so I kind of look at it as, you know, how will I myself, as a member of this party, conduct myself. And so I plan to continue to, number one, I'm someone who, you know, certainly believes in the principles of our party, but I'm also have an ability to reach out and try to find common ground so we can get results. So, and that's the kind of constructive work that I'm interested in for the party, and I hope that's what we have an opportunity to do, and that's what I'm going to be driving for our party and for the country. I mean, it's the work has to be hand in hand.
Regarding the hearing for Merrick Garland, you said that you wanted to give voters a voice on that, and after you said that, there's this flood of letters from people saying, I'm sure you've heard this counter-argument that, well, the voters did speak. They re-elected President Obama.
I think I saw that in your op-ed pages too, so.
Probably.
Sure.
I guess the question is, at what point in a president's term do you think it's more important to then say, well, let's hold off a little bit and let's see where this next election goes, rather than acting on an operation? Is there a cutoff point? Because that was March, right? So.
Right. I mean, I think I can only speak to the situation that we had before us. So we have obviously the untimely passing of Justice Scalia, and it was, you know, we have a situation where you clearly have a four court, and one that seems to be broken down on some fairly clear, on most issues, major issues, ideological grounds. And you also have a situation where you have a president of one party and you have, you know, obviously a Senate of the other party heading into a presidential election. So I think that the circumstances here are why I came to the conclusion that I would like the people to weigh in November, and we're obviously very close to this election in terms of who is the next president that's going to be elected. And certainly that's how I viewed this situation as opposed to a timeline situation.
So you would have had the same reaction then if the situation was moved back another 6 months? Just
well, I don't know necessarily. I have the situation that's before me. And so if you look even at my record in terms of nominations, I mean, I think I've been a productive player of working across the aisle when there have been times when there have been difficulties getting not only other judicial nominations, but also members of the cabinet to the floor. So, I mean, I would be looking at the whole picture.
Do you think the Democrats would have done the same exact thing if the roles were reversed?
Yes. And it's not a matter of, but I don't want to speak for them, but, you know, I think clearly their leaders had made statements to that effect. So I don't think that the situation would have been different during this time frame with, you know, obviously an unexpected passing and heading into a presidential election.
I know it's hard to answer this without having gone through the hearing process, but have you given any thought to whether Merrick Garland would be somebody you could support?
Yeah, I think I couldn't. I met with him.
Mm-hmm.
I did spend an hour meeting with him. Had a cordial meeting. We talked about a number of issues, but I obviously think that full vetting process is important. And so, you know, at this point, I haven't made conclusions on him.
Would you like to see Roe v. Wade overturned?
You know, I'm someone who, as you know, I believe in protecting life. It's a matter of conscience for me. I do have exceptions for rape, incest, or life of the mother. In terms of the Supreme Court, issues, I mean, I believe that those issues are better decided by the elected legislatures. So in terms of the structure, I believe that's a better way to decide these issues. That said, it's obviously been the law, and it's been maintained as the law for a long period.
I found this really interesting fact today, that the Judiciary Committee is the only Senate committee in which a Republican woman has never served. I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
That's an interesting factoid.
yeah.
Huh.
So I'm just wondering, would you consider requesting that assignment for a real-life?
No, not because I don't think.
You don't want to break that?
I could, yeah, break ground. You know, not because I don't think it's a really important committee, but I have to say I like my committees because I'm on Armed Services and Homeland Security. Actually, I got to add another committee, so I've got Homeland Security and Commerce, Science, and Transportation, Small Business and Entrepreneurship, and Budget. So originally I only had 4 committees. I like those committees, and you know, obviously you also gain experience on those committees, so it helps in terms of your ability to chair subcommittees that, like on the Commerce Committee, I chair the Aviation Subcommittee for the nation on aviation matters. So that's a pretty significant committee. And then on Armed Services, I chair the Readiness Subcommittee for the military for the nation. And so if you get off a committee, then you're going to give up the ability to chair some of these subcommittees too, which are pretty important.
We didn't ask this of any of the other candidates at your level. Didn't ask Maggie specifically. But you would be in a position to at least help, as you did with our bridge out here, to smooth the way for that in Washington and perhaps in other ways. So it makes me wonder how you feel about commuter rail. You're part of the state, certainly.
Oh, I mean,
part of the state favors it.
yes. So my view on it is that if the state comes forward with a plan that, you know, the financial plan of how, what they believe that is the federal, we're not going to be able to fund it all from the federal level. So
Sure.
I think realistically that plan has to come forward from the state and local level. And I'm assuming that we'd also kind of have to bridge with Massachusetts too to say, are they willing to contribute on their end to it? So if the state came forward with a plan that, you know, obviously was supported by the state and communicated with locals, here's our fiscal plan, you know, I would work with them to help them on the federal end to get the funding that was, you know, allocated for the piece that would probably be the federal piece. So that's the way I look at it, and I look at my role as this issue really should be decided at the state and local level, and I will support those efforts on whatever conclusion or plan. But I haven't seen yet the sort of plan that brings it all together to say, here's how we can build it and sustain it, and here's the piece that we can, that is, you know, sensible in terms of the federal piece. I haven't seen that full plan.
The rub with those is almost always the degree of subsidy. Do you have any thoughts on just what's appropriate, given that?
Yeah, I think that's the real issue, you know, the sustainability. And I have to say, not being directly in the state piece, that would require, I think that would not only look at the ridership, but, you know, what are the local communities or the even private sector willing to contribute? And I just don't know all the ins and outs to be able to.
No one does that.
And that's why I feel like really this should be, if bringing on this project, this is one where I think leadership, bringing people together, coming forward and saying to the delegation, here's the piece we need your help with. And that's where I'd be looking to see on that point, on that piece, you know, I would work with whatever plan the state decides to do. And if the state obviously decides not to pursue it, that's their decision too.
You know, from Ferguson to Tulsa to Baltimore, I could go on and on and on. And, you know, there've been lots of protests on the streets. So from your perspective, do you see institutional racism in our judicial system and in law enforcement?
I don't. You know, I think that, because you describe it as institutional, I think that we have obviously situations where police, like other people, commit wrongdoing, and they need to be fully investigated and obviously handled and within the law the same way that other people are, would be investigated, and if there's a crime committed, appropriately prosecuted. And certainly I had some cases when I was Attorney General where I had to deal with officer-involved shootings and very difficult cases, so that was a responsibility of mine when I was Attorney General. As I look at what we're, having worked with the police very closely, and still, obviously, even though I'm not in the same role, I still connect with them quite a bit, is when we look at the issues that are happening, I think we do have some very strong relationships in New Hampshire at the state, the local level, and even with federal authorities. We have a way in New Hampshire of being able to bring people together, and I saw it when I was Attorney General of working with the police at every level, and that in turn, the police working with the communities. So we need more community relationships, and I think the police are part of that solution. And we in New Hampshire, I think, have good, strong relationships. Things like the Police Athletic League in Nashua and Manchester, where the police are not only have their law enforcement function, but you see them involved in many community activities that build relationships with the youth in the community. And I think those kinds of activities are very important. So I hope that we can get to a national dialogue where the police are part of this solution of how we bring people together. And I also think training is important. So in New Hampshire, we have uniform training at the Police Standards and Training Council. And the police in our state get a uniform training on certainly whether it's use of force or other enforcement of the law. And so good training is really important for our law enforcement officers too. So that's something I've been glad that we've had uniformity in our state. Whether a police officer can maintain his or her certification that is separate from a review that a prosecutor would conduct if there's a particular matter. So I don't know how it is in every state, but it seems like we have, while we have cases that, we're always going to have cases that we have to look at and make sure they're handled appropriately and investigated fully. I think we do have some good relationships in New Hampshire.
When Donald Trump was asked a similar question that Steve asked you, I think it was more in the lines of healing racial wounds. He brought up stop and frisk as a way to maybe. Do you remember that? It was the first debate.
Yeah, I don't remember that, but yeah, sorry.
What do you think about that? I mean, the concept of that being a way to, that intense law and order is the way that we can sort of eliminate I guess what he was trying to say is that that's how you get these, what do you call rioting and upheaval in race relations.
Yeah, I'm not sure what he was saying, but I think that certainly in communities you want police people to feel that they're safe in their communities and that the law is being enforced and that people can walk safely within any community, whether it's a school or any kind of activity that they want to conduct. But as I look at the issue that I just talked about in terms of some of these incidents nationally, what I'd like to see is the two issues I talked about, developing relationships and supporting the efforts that law enforcement have with the community to make sure those relationships are strong and the communication is strong, and the training piece. That's where I would focus.
So do you think stop and frisk makes communities safer?
I know that at one point it was in place in New York City. I don't know all the ins and outs of that policy in New York City, but if the law enforcement officers and the mayor at the time thought that was appropriate, what they needed to do in New York City, as long as it's within the Constitution, I think it may be appropriate in that setting. Obviously New Hampshire is different than New York City, and so law enforcement are going to conduct themselves here, with what they think is appropriate to keep our community safe within the law and the Constitution.
That was in New York, though, was found at a lower court level unconstitutional because it led to profiling, which surprised no one. And also, police would argue profiling is more effective than not. Nonetheless, it's discriminatory.
So Ralph, I have to say, let me just say, I haven't studied the decision or the issue fully, so I don't want to speak to the legal decision just because I haven't read it. So
something like body cameras, do you think all police should be required to wear body cameras, and that may that be a way to rebuild trust between police and communities and certain.
Yeah, I don't know that, I think that a lot of police departments are making the decision for themselves also to use body cameras. So where they're appropriate, I wouldn't mandate it here in the state, but it's obviously a state issue. But I think that you see a lot of police thinking that, they want to make sure that you have some departments that are making that decision because they want to make sure that people know that they're being transparent and that when they conduct a stop that everything is obviously in accordance with the law and the Constitution.
So, one of the big issues that we hear about from a lot of our readers is Social Security. People
Absolutely.
People wondering what's over the horizon. So
It's not good what's over the horizon.
What is over the horizon?
I mean, if you look at the trustees' reports for Social Security, at 2034, if we do nothing, then Social Security will take at least a 21% cut. So that's not an acceptable solution, right? So we do need to come to that point that Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill came to, where we have bipartisan work to extend and strengthen the longevity of Social Security so that our seniors know that they're not going to suddenly come to a point where they're worried about a cut or they're worried about diminishment of Social Security. And I had two grandparents, very blessed. My meme and my grandfather, who only passed within the last 2 years. Oh, no, it's a train. I thought that was the commuter train, right?
It's a train.
Yeah, but they were with us till 96 and 98, which is incredible, and worked really hard, and they couldn't have done that without Social Security. So I think what I would like to see with Social Security is that it stopped being used as like this, basically, we're going to scare people and we're going to use it as some kind of political attack tool. Like, frankly, I've seen in my own race here in the Senate, and say, okay, what are we going to do to work together to preserve it? Because I believe very firmly those who are in retirement, I don't want to change this program for them. I want to make sure it's strong so they don't come to 2034 and worry about what's going to happen. And then, those who are coming to retirement age or near retirement age, that we make sure it's the same situation for them. But for younger people, if we aren't thinking about how we strengthen and work together, and I use Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill as an example because here you had members of both parties that came together where they raised the cap and then over a gradual period, they very gradually raised, essentially the time of retirement. So this is the kind of bipartisan compromise I hope we can come to. And I hope it's one that I have an opportunity to be a part of because there needs to be productive work on this. And it's the same thing with Medicare. So Medicare trustees, it's 2028. And so that's actually, the healthcare challenges are on the horizon too. And we have a demographic issue as well. So if you go back to 1950 and you look at the number of workers who are working for every one recipient, I mean, I'm going from memory here, but I believe it's roughly 40 for one. And now we're down to 2.9 or 2.8 for one, and it's diminishing. So that's also another piece of this in terms of workforce strength and making sure that it's all related too in terms of the economy and workforce strength. And in Medicare, we have the similar challenge where you have, your average person has paid in roughly for every $1 they've paid in, there's 3 being taken out. So these are the challenges we have to work together on. And, we're living longer, which is fantastic, which we want to encourage and people live quality lives. So we just have to deal with this issue and work in a bipartisan basis because that's when major reforms happen like this. I believe that the Ronald Reagan Tip O'Neill example is the one that, you know, I'm not saying the specifics of what was done there, but how it was conducted and how people worked together in a sensible way to compromise.
Specifically, you're talking the payroll tax cap. lifting
Yeah, that's what they
and the
did. I mean,
retirement
listen, they
age.
came and they sat down and they figured out, and then they went to the members on both sides, and this was a bipartisan agreement. So that's the kind of model we need to follow. I'm not saying we do the exact deal again, but my point is that that was an example of the kind of work I think we need to do on these issues to preserve the longevity of these programs and strengthen them, rather than, you know, every 2 years say, you want to do this, you want to do, like, let's work together on it.
How about something like means testing? Is that something you could support?
I've said before that I would be open to further means testing, but it would have to make sure that it doesn't, you know, doesn't impact or hurt people who are certainly within the, you know, I think middle income situation where really it would be harmful to them, and I want to make sure that we be very thoughtful about that.
There's one issue demographically with that that's coming up sooner rather than later, and that's, and I haven't seen anybody in government service really talk about it, but many economists have, and it's that the average savings of most Americans near retirement age in 401ks with supplemental pensions is, I think, $30,000, and what they have is whatever they earn on that and Social Security. So, and there are a lot of people who get minimal Social Security.
Right.
A lot of women particularly, but
They perhaps weren't in the workforce, they're not long enough to get.
not long enough, or they worked at such low-income jobs that, I mean,
Yeah.
the average payment's 14. I mean, that's
Right.
nothing now.
Or we're balancing also, but we're also, you know,
So
taking care of the families.
what do we do with that really sizable population of boomers who didn't have pensions in the workplace and really will survive only marginally on Social Security payments as they exist now? Are we looking at a need to raise Social Security or deal with it through other welfare systems? Because one of the fears is, of course, a big shift to the local level.
Of
And
course,
just say
yeah.
churches and welfare
Yeah.
offices take care of it.
Well, I would hope that if we were to undertake a review of how do we strengthen and reform Social Security and make it viable, we would consider that those group of people and make sure that we're trying to ensure that as we look at the strengthening and the need there, that that's something that we would hope to address and look at. So that would be my first in terms of how we would handle it. I think you could bring together a group and say, here's our financial issue, here's a group of people that we need to make sure that we're focusing on here, because otherwise they're going to be falling through the cracks in other ways where they can't sustain themselves in retirement. And then I think we should be looking at, okay, in terms of younger people planning for their retirement in the future, you know, how do we make sure, whether it's the tax code issues, the way that retirement vehicles are structured gives them the opportunity to be able to, so looking forward to the people who are still in a position to be able to plan for the future, that we are looking at the policies that we pass to put them in a stronger position to do that.
Just more specifically, you told the union leader that you're open to means testing and also raising the cap for high-income
Yes.
workers. Do you have
That's
any
true.
numbers that would be a starting point for changing those?
I don't. I think I'd want to work on those two issues that I'm open to, because I think you talk to a lot of young people and they'll look at you and say, well, I'm not even sure it's going to be there for me. So we should be engaging them, because there at some point, all of us in this room, you know, we were 18 at one point, but it came pretty quickly to where I am at 48, you know, so it comes quicker than you think.
Have you seen any movement on the issue in the past 6 years? I mean, it seems like it's kind of, we're talking about the same
No,
thing.
we haven't seen that much movement. You know, I actually would hope there'd be more, and I hope that, you know, obviously it'd be really helpful if you had a president when it was Ronald Reagan who was pushing the issue with the Speaker of the House, so it does help. It is important to have leadership on both sides of the aisle really raising the issue. You know, at one point while serving in the Senate, I was part of discussions at the White House that were talking about some of these big picture fiscal issues that never came to an agreement, but that's the closest that I was part of really a bigger picture discussion on this.
You see your party, and you broke with your party several times, but the Senate President's position has for years now been to maximize obstruction of the President's agenda, and famously make sure he's a one-term president, which didn't happen. But we've seen that, and I think it's one reason Congress's ratings close to single digits. If Hillary is the president, do you see that ending? And let's say, assuming the Republicans keep both houses, or is the nation going to face 4 more years of essentially gridlock?
Well, can I just say that when Harry Reid was in charge of the Senate, the gridlock was, just palpable. I mean, you had a situation where, you had a situation where, members of the Senate on the Democratic side of the aisle, only didn't have a roll call amendment vote on one of their amendments during their entire term. So the one thing I can say is that when the Republicans took over the Senate, we have had many more votes, many more amendments, did pass a 5-year highway bill that was finally long-term funding, which we need more of. We also did do the doc fix, which was bipartisan, which was a big issue on Medicare, because essentially doctors' rates would have been cut very significantly, and doctors wouldn't have continued to take Medicare cases. And this was something that it was like Groundhog Day, that kept coming back to Washington every year. So we finally worked together to fix that. This summer I was able to work to get the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act passed. It's something I worked on for 3 years to focus on the heroin epidemic, the national response, and this was really 2 of us as Republicans and 2 of us as Democrats came together and were able to get that passed. So there's a lot more to be done, and there's a lot more to be desired, but my focus is going to be on whoever's in charge of getting things done. And that means finding common ground where I can to get legislation passed to solve the problems that people have here in New Hampshire and across the country. And, I have one of the most bipartisan records. I have, I think, the respect of not only my own caucus, but relationships and built across the aisle to be able to be in a position to get legislation passed and done and solve problems. So that's the kind of way I want the Senate conducted, and that's certainly what I would urge our leadership to give people on both sides of the aisle the opportunity, if they have a good idea, to bring it forward for a vote, and so that we can, really be focused on getting things done.
I want to make sure we have a little bit of time to talk about Syria.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit, and I'm going to throw a few things out at you, and you can answer these however you want, but
Sure.
When we look at moving forward there, how do we do that in terms of Russia, use of military force, the potential creation of a safe zone, and also addressing the humanitarian crisis?
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation in Syria, and it's a devastating humanitarian crisis. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people that have been murdered. And as a result of that, you have many thousands and thousands of people who have obviously fled from Syria. And I had a few years ago an opportunity to visit one of the refugee camps in Jordan. And if you look at the infusion of the refugees in Jordan and Lebanon, and certainly even in Europe and other countries in the region, the Syrian situation is absolutely a difficult situation. Let me just tell you what I think. It would be important to establish a safe zone. It would have been easier if it were done earlier. So it's a much more challenging situation right now. But a safe zone would give people in the region a place to be, where they aren't staying on where in their land that would allow them to be hopefully without being bombed and killed every day. But right now, the situation is very difficult. You know, I would support the establishment of a safe zone. It's become so much more complicated because we didn't lead sooner on this issue. And so if we were going to establish such a safe zone, I would want more involvement of NATO than we have had. Because right now, all NATO is doing is they are helping with the train, advise, and assist function for some of the troops in Iraq, but I think NATO could join much more strongly. The Arab nations could join much more strongly in that safe zone, but we have to deal with Russia. So Russia and Iran are supporting the Assad regime, and they have also, as you know, are bombing even some of the forces that we're hoping to help us defeat ISIS and also establish more stability in the region. And so they are working as a very counterproductive force right now.
Would they respect a safe zone?
I think that this is the challenge with Russia. They are not going to respect a safe zone unless they think that we're prepared, along with others, not just us, but our NATO allies as well, to enforce this, and that they would take us seriously. And you have a series of conduct here with Russia going back to reset, the reset policy, going forward with invasion of Ukraine. You know, we won't provide defensive arms so they can defend themselves. We have the situation with the violation of the INF Treaty, really negligible response from us from that, and that's an important nuclear treaty. You have obviously even the defensive capabilities that Russia sold to Iran that really undermine some of our interests and our allies and with Iran. So there's a series of course of conduct that leads into this that we've let them do. And so until we're saying we're not going to let you do anymore, I'm not sure we're going to get any attention from Vladimir Putin. And it shouldn't just be us. I think we should lead. You know, Germany's thinking of putting sanctions. Like let's really get our NATO partners to join us in that if we're going to take a tougher stance against Vladimir Putin and his aggression. With respect to Syria, we have the ISIS situation. Is we have to defeat ISIS and we have to destroy them, and they have obviously territory in Iraq and Syria, and we have right now, as you know, we have our fighter pilots who are engaged in combat there that are dropping sorties and bombs in Iraq and Syria to defeat ISIS. We have 4,500 troops, ground troops, and the president is increasing those numbers. So we've had this creeping incrementalism with no really comprehensive strategy for how this is going to not only deal with the humanitarian crisis, Russia, but also making sure that we continue to pressure ISIS to defeat them. So it would be having the president really have a stronger comprehensive plan on this would be quite helpful, because as you do this kind of incrementalism, you worry that, we've had other situations in our history where incrementalism isn't the right way to fight a war. So, this is a very difficult situation. It's complicated. I have laid out, I did a speech for an hour in the New Hampshire Institute of Politics about how I would defeat ISIS. And so certainly I've laid out a full plan, because that involves also some of the issues we have at home in terms of our intelligence agencies and what we need to do at home. Because ISIS, their ability to have this territory, they're using that social media, other means to show their success, to encourage not only people who are there, and also in Europe, they've infiltrated refugees, but also to encourage, as you've seen, some of the attacks, and to encourage people here to self-radicalize. So we have to deal with our intelligence issues here and our homeland issues.
So can ISIS in Syria be fully defeated if al-Assad remains in power and Russia is playing the role that it's playing now?
I think that overall, that ISIS can be defeated, but it's much more difficult. It is absolutely much more difficult with Assad, with Russia, because you have Russia actually in instances dropping bombs on people that we are hoping to work with on the ground to help defeat ISIS. So they are working at times in a counterproductive way to what we were trying to accomplish. So it is, I think it's possible, but it's much more challenging than if you had a situation where Russia was not acting in the way Russia is right now. You know, I know one of the issues also is, if you look at what's happening in Europe, ISIS is weaponizing refugee flows. That's not from me. This is what our top defense officials are telling me in the Armed Services Committee. So we have to also deal with this issue of, and that's why the safe zone perhaps would be, if we could establish an important way to help people have a place where they're not being killed and bombed. But the refugee issue is a very important issue. You know, I know you had Governor Hassan in here the other day and asked her about Secretary Clinton's plan, because I had read your interview of her. And, you know, I think she didn't tell you where she stands on that. We have had some efforts in the Senate to enhance the security measures we have for bringing refugees here. In fact, we voted on those measures, but they've been blocked by the Senate Democrats, so I think there are some steps we can take that aren't being taken right now.
So the plan you would support is I think it's 65,000?
It's 65,000.
Is it the volume of the plan? Or
Yeah, I don't see a plan there to be able to guarantee that the people who are coming here are connected with ISIS. And the problem is we have a big intelligence gap. I mean, our top intelligence officials and our director of our FBI has testified before the Homeland Security Committee and the Armed Services Committee that we can query the database till the cows come home, but if you don't have information about people that can be put in the database in the first place, it's not going to tell you whether or not what their background is or whether they have had any involvement in ISIS. So that to me has to be the foremost responsibility for us. The bill that we had on the Senate floor that got blocked would have required our top intelligence officials to certify before any individual is brought here.
With respect to defending the safe zone, sorry, I doubt that sanctions would be enough. Putin is.
Oh, no, I think that you would have to be prepared to have a coalition. Well,
you know, that's, I think what the public fears is we'd be back in duck and cover days.
You know, Ralph, I think it would have been a lot. I'm not telling you if there had been stronger American leadership. I think the situation of establishing a safe zone sooner, which would have been much more, you know, I'm not going to call it easy, but it would have been a much easier situation than we have now. It is a much more difficult situation right now. But, you know, I do think that there is a place for American leadership here. And if we were to align not just on our own, but really get the support of the NATO countries who are being flooded with refugees. This is a real issue for them as well as our Arab partners in the region who are also being flooded and are concerned about this situation. So I think there is an alliance here that it would even be difficult for Vladimir Putin to be against all of the alliance. But that's going to take strong American leadership to bring that plan together.
So you said just a couple minutes ago that the president doesn't really have a comprehensive strategy on ISIS. So why not debate a new authorization for the use of military force, which sort of sets a guide for that going forward, and I think which has been blocked in Congress since I think President Obama brought one up in February?
Well, what happened, Ali, is that he brought the plan forward. It went to the Foreign Relations Committee, which is the first committee that would have hearings on and then would vote on a plan for an AUMF, and then it would go to the Senate floor. And it has stayed in that committee because members of both sides of the aisle are very unsatisfied with what he has proposed. So to me, that begs the question of the plan, that there really isn't a satisfaction that that strong offering of the comprehensive plan is there with the AUMF. So I would be, you know, obviously I support voting on an AUMF, but that has to be driven by the Commander-in-Chief. We obviously need to vote on it, but we can't write it in the sense that we won't be implementing it. So I think it's really important that he come with a leadership position with the plan of the situation as we've talked about. There are a lot of different pieces in it, the military piece, the diplomatic piece. We have the ISIS, the authorization to defeat ISIS. If we establish a safe zone, what authorities is seeking in each of those veins. So that is why it's sitting, I believe, in the Foreign Relations Committee right now.
So if he brought one between now and January that you found satisfactory, you would vote on it?
Absolutely. If the Foreign Relations Committee votes out a plan, I'll vote for it. That's the first step in this. But my sense is of why it's languishing in there is for the reasons I told you. But I would obviously, before I would tell you what I would do on it, I want to know what it is and whether I think it's sufficient and effective and going to be, a strategy that will defeat ISIS, number one, as a priority.
You have said that you believe New Hampshire should submit mental health records to the gun background check system as a way to strengthen the
Yes.
existing, process that we have. But your view is in contrast to many top Republicans here in New Hampshire and some mental health advocates who say that it reinforces stigma and also limits privacy. So how do you convince your own party to move forward on this issue when they're really blocking it here in New Hampshire?
Well, the law, right now, it is the law federally that if you are adjudicated a danger to yourself or others, and let me give you a couple of examples. If you're found, for example, not guilty by reason of insanity, and you killed someone, and we had some of those cases that I dealt with as Attorney General, those are examples of situations that are likely to fit in the federal criteria that are mental health records that by the law now should be in the background check system. So there needs to be obviously a legal process. There needs to be the appropriate adjudication to protect people's rights. And the standard, as I recall, is that a danger to yourself or others, and you have to be adjudicated to have been found that, and then you are not in a position to be able to purchase a firearm. To me, those judicial protections are important, but as I understand the law, they're part of the federal law. And so I have supported getting the records in, and I voted at the federal level for measures that would encourage states to comply with the law and get the records in. So I very firmly believe that people who are struggling with mental illness, that we should get them help, that we should be looking at reforming our mental health system. In my role in the Senate, I've been a champion of this issue. So I've worked across the aisle on what's called the Mental Health First Aid Act. I'm the lead Republican on that. That actually would help us identify sooner the signs of mental illness to get people help, and would train not only would train people in our schools and our law enforcement to be able to have these identifying factors, and then have supported the Mental Health Reform Act, have supported efforts to enhance and strengthen, hopefully more treatment capacity for people struggling with mental illness, because this is a very important issue, and I do think that we shouldn't stigmatize people who are struggling with mental illness. But we're talking about a category of people under the federal law who have been adjudicated a danger to themselves or others.
When the GOP presidential field was full, we had 18 or so, was there one that you
It was full, yeah.
Yeah. Was there one that you were rooting for more than others, one that sort of you identified most with on domestic foreign policy?
Well, I did not endorse any of the candidates, and I know many of them personally because I serve with them. So I did not have, a candidate that I would pick out of that, because I would have endorsed if I thought that I was going to get
involved. You would have
endorsed
endorsed
if I were going to endorse. Obviously I would have identified who I was aligned, but I'm not going to endorse now.
It's a parlor game. You can do it.
It sure is. And there were a lot of good people running. I mean, there were a lot of good people that I serve with that I respect.
How about a couple? Maybe two that you liked particularly more than others?
I think we had a lot of people running. If I were going to endorse, I would have done it back then.
So I'm going to venture to guess that you're about the volunteer quite a bit on the campaign.
I'm hearing a lot about it, yes.
And certainly not a direct quote, but
well, let me just say that I'm hearing from people in New Hampshire quite a bit about higher deductibles, higher co-pays, and we know nationally the premium increase is roughly 25%. We don't yet know what the rates are going to be yet here in New Hampshire, but I can tell you anecdotally that what I'm hearing is a real concern about the healthcare costs. In fact, right before this, I was at a business in Hudson, small business, and they were talking about the rates that they were paying for families, and you know, it was so high that they were again saying to me, we can't sustain this. So here's some pieces that I'm sponsoring legislation on individually. I have supported and fought for the repeal of the medical device tax, and that's been suspended for 2 years. And so we will be addressing, I hope we do repeal it, because we have thousands of jobs in New Hampshire that are actually tied to medical device companies, and also it's a tax on revenue. So when you think about innovative new devices or research and development, it really does, I think, have a negative impact on not only healthcare costs, but innovation in healthcare when it comes to medical devices. The other piece I've sponsored repealing the Cadillac tax. I've sponsored repealing what's called the health insurance tax, which essentially I think is a pass-through on small businesses in particular that drives up healthcare costs. I have sponsored and worked on a bipartisan basis to restore the 40-hour work week, because the Affordable Care Act actually takes it to 30, and that's an issue that people in New Hampshire have raised with me in terms of hours and how, from the workforce perspective, I'm hearing that their hours are being changed, and because we've always had a traditional 40-hour work week. I have worked also to address concerns of our ski areas and with their seasonal employees in terms of how seasonal employees are interpreted under the health care law, and have supported legislation to clarify that definition of what a seasonal employee is. I believe that we should be moving towards more transparency in the healthcare system that doesn't exist now. I believe that we should have more competition and choice, and so where I've supported efforts, anything that will result in more competition and choice, as opposed to right now we're in a situation where the healthcare law is based on one type of plan that people have, and that choice comes down, and there's less choice, there's less competition. We've never had the across state lines issue, which I would support as well. And I also am supporting restoring and extending health savings accounts. I have also a bill to double the amount of flexible spending accounts. That's another whole topic, but and so there are a number of measures that I hope we can work on, because I don't see this healthcare cost getting better. And I hope, as you know, former President Clinton, recently said that he thought it was a crazy system. And I have to say, I would agree when he said that there's a group of people who are working very hard, who are paying a lot more for healthcare, and if we don't address giving them an opportunity to have lower costs, then they're not going to be able to afford it, and they're working very hard out there, and they don't have as much access to healthcare, because when you have a higher deductible, if your deductible goes up to thousands of dollars for an average family, that's a big deal, and that's a lot of money.
I was just reading a submission from a student at NHTI before I came up here. Actually.
Yes.
She was lamenting the fact that in the debates that you and Governor Hassan had, that nobody has talked about climate change, that it's not enough to just ask people if they believe in climate change anymore. We move past that. So what she wanted to know is, how will you be a leader on a clean energy future?
So I believe that New Hampshire has a beautiful environment, that it's part of, and being a conservative is about conserving everything, and I believe that we should conserve our environment. So on climate change, I was the first Republican in the country to support the President's Clean Power Plan, and I looked at it very carefully in terms of the impact on New Hampshire, and really sought feedback from individuals, businesses, the environmental community, and we're in a position in New Hampshire where, because of some of the steps we've already taken under state law, we're going to be well positioned to meet the standards and the goals set in the Clean Power Plan. And so this is something that I think is important, and I would like to be in a position to drive more bipartisan discussion around how we protect our environment than happens in Washington. Because right now it seems to be that you end up with these discussions that I think are not mutually exclusive. You know, you have one group saying, well, this is gonna kill all the jobs, right? And then you have another group saying, well, yes, we just have to protect the environment. And I think the discussions go together. It's a mutual discussion, and we have to forge, I hope, more bipartisanship around how we conserve our environment, because that is not just, you know, obviously climate, but it's issues that on the Midwest power plants where, you know, even going back to my time as Attorney General, protecting, making sure you were using the best technology to protect from emissions, making sure when we're dealing with things like mercury and hotspots, we're using the best technology and standards there. So strong supporter of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, because I think that, you know, we have some beautiful spaces that have been preserved in New Hampshire through public-private partnerships that allow everyone to enjoy our environment. So I think this is an issue that should be a strong bipartisan issue, and I hope that we can work together on not only issues of how do we invest in research to develop the best technology to protect our environment, because I think things like, you know, how do you store solar and what kind of research can be conducted to benefit everyone at the federal level, but also issues like energy efficiency and how do we make sure that we're making it easier for people to go for energy efficiency solutions. So I supported the energy efficiency bill. I had an important amendment that was part of the energy efficiency bill that Senator Shaheen and Senator Portman had that was called the Better Buildings Act, and it was focused on energy efficiency in commercial buildings. So this issue is one that's important to me, and it's one I think I've tried to lead on.
What about the critics who say you've shown too much support in your voting record for fossil fuels still, whether it's Keystone or tax breaks for the oil, that kind of stuff?
Well, just to be clear, I voted in the Senate to eliminate subsidies for all energy forms. So that was about, from my perspective, making the tax code even-handed. So it really is cherry-picking my vote record to say, oh, I just, you know, didn't vote to eliminate subsidies. I wanted to make it a more even-handed tax code for all energy forms. So, and that's what I voted for. But in terms of my support for energy, I believe in an all-of-the-above energy policy. But I also believe that we can use our technological ability and our innovation to ensure that when you are using fossil fuels, that you're using the best technology available to protect the environment. So for example, on the issue of the cross-air pollution rule, when there was scrubber technology that could be put on the Midwest power plants that existed, was developed to protect New Hampshire from being a downwind state from emissions. That's why I supported those efforts, both as Attorney General and in the Senate, even, you know, crossing the aisle to do that. So I think we can develop and ensure that we use fossil fuels in ways that we use the best technology to protect the environment while continuing to invest in development of renewables, extension and expansion of renewables. But there has to be some more research done, which I think the federal government can play an important role on issues that still remain challenges for us with renewables. One of them comes to mind is, you know, storage with solar. There are other challenges I'm sure we could solve if we put our best and the brightest on it and put us in a stronger position to be able to use more renewable energy.
Do you think it was too soon to level the playing field in energy sources? Because what that effort did was cause incentives.
In the omnibus and the funding bill, we did extend those, and I did support that then. But, you know, what happens in these campaigns is people cherry pick one vote on the Senate floor,
Sure.
you know, and that vote rather than saying we're going to target one energy form, I'd like to see us do some simplification of our tax code. So that was the vote I took there. But I also know what the issues were with the extension on solar, and frankly worked and supported those when they came before the Senate in the omnibus bill. But I would like us to do tax reform. I mean, that's something that hasn't gotten a lot of discussion on this campaign trail, but I think it needs to be done. And we need to look across the code and say, okay, what's something that's benefiting everyone versus, and how do we make sure that we're competitive to keep jobs here in the United States?
What does tax reform look like? Is it in terms of the tax brackets, or is it?
I would start first where I see some common ground, and that's the business, essentially business taxes. The common ground is that even President Obama said that he believes that our corporate rate and our business taxes are too high because we have the highest in the developed world. And so what you see is companies that are located here deciding that they're going to put their headquarters overseas. And you see roughly $3 trillion that's being held overseas that could be brought here back to the United States, but it's being held there because of the tax code. So that's where this cries out for reform. And when we do it, we can't just think of the corporate piece. We have to think of the flow-through entities, because my husband's a small business owner and he has an LLC. A lot of our small businesses in New Hampshire are not organized necessarily as corporations. They're organized as subchapter S flow-through entities. So we have to really look at both when it comes to being fair and competitive for our businesses. But this is an area where I hope we can get some bipartisanship around, because this is about keeping investment and jobs in the United States. And while both sides may not agree altogether on how to get there, there does seem to be, even with some of the discussion, an opportunity really to focus on that. And I think otherwise, can you imagine if we continue to see companies located overseas, if we continue to see money parked overseas that could be investing here in terms of jobs, in terms of investment, in terms of revenue that goes into helping us in our treasury with, you know, the fiscal challenges that we face. All of it means this is something that cries out for work and to be done.
I just have one
Yes.
quick question, just returning to something we talked about. This has come up in the news today, and I just wanted to get your take on it. But you said, going back to this, you said you're going to write in Mike Pence for president. How is a vote for him different than one for Trump, when he is one of the biggest apologists for Trump, and just today said, you know, he's going to bring out evidence this afternoon, he hasn't yet revealed it, that will apparently clear Trump of all sexual assault allegations that have now been brought against him?
Yeah, as I've said, I'm not voting for Donald Trump, and I will be writing him in separately as president. So, and I believe he's qualified to serve. I also won't be voting for Hillary Clinton.
I go back to climate change. A lot of the more forward-thinking people in the attempt to address it fast enough to meet the accords say that it can really only be done with a carbon tax that applies not just to big industry, but across the board to the automotive industry, home heating, whatever. A lot of people in both parties, including your opponent, don't support a carbon tax. I wonder where you stand on it and what it would take for you to decide it was necessary.
I don't support a carbon tax either,
Right.
Ralph. So I think that a carbon tax could be quite problematic in terms of the concerns I would have about average people in terms of energy costs, and that impact on me would concern me. So I think what I'd like us to continue to move on is the issues that I talked about: energy efficiency, further development of research that benefits more sustainable renewables and expanding renewables, and also obviously the measures and the goals laid out in the Clean Power Plan, and having states meet those goals when it comes to carbon.
I don't have to interrupt, I just want to keep an eye on the time, because we have another stop this afternoon.
And just on the Clean Power Plan, you mentioned you stand apart from your party on your support for that. How, if
I do, it's not easy being green.
Well, if Republicans do retain control of the Senate, I mean, how do you convince a lot of your colleagues to make sure that states do comply with the Clean Power Plan when a lot of those very states are suing the federal government over this plan?
Well, every state has a right to, certainly to sue if they think they have a right under, listen, I was Attorney General and I sued George Bush's administration over issues like the cross-air pollution rule. So, that happens among states, and states are going to exercise their right to do that. But here's where I think we need to go on this, is that I would like us to actually have more of a bipartisan discussion on it. I established an energy and environment working group, Republican working group, and this is a group that I hope to build on to talk about these issues within my own party, to build support for how, issues that we can work together on, whether it's further research, energy efficiency, how do we put us in a stronger position with regard to renewable power. So that's where I think this would be helpful for us to go, so it stops being, it sometimes seems like a very partisan discussion when I think all of us have a deep interest in conserving and preserving our environment as we think about the place that we live in, and the planet that we live on is important for all of us, and certainly my kids and all of our kids.
Can I just ask you one more quick question?
Sure.
So a big part of the Tip O'Neill Ronald Reagan thing was that they would fight during the day and they would socialize at night. So I'm wondering, do you socialize?
That's what I'm told.
Do you socialize with Democrats when you're in Washington?
Well, the women in the Senate have a sort of a unique situation because there's 20 of us, and we periodically get together for dinner. Every few months we get together for dinner as a group, and so that's something I'm part of. One night we did bowling at the White House. That was kind of fun. But so there are ways when, of course, you need to build relationships and respect each other and trust each other, and those types of relationships help you build and forge a consensus to get things done. And I've tried to do that, and I think showing respect for other people that have different viewpoints allows you to, and also knowing them as people, not just for what their policy positions are, helps you come to a bigger understanding. And I hope that the ability to do that. That's why I think I have a very strong bipartisan record, and I think I'm someone that the other side of the aisle looks to when they want to find a partner to focus on solving a problem, and that's what I would hope to continue to.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.